The first writers in residence came to the James Merrill House 25 years ago, shortly after James Merrill's death in 1995. Since then, over 80 writers have visited, staying in his home, a National Historic Landmark, to work on projects of their own. Thanks to Merrill's generosity, the house now belongs to the Stonington Village Improvement Association and is an ongoing inspiration for writers and poets from around the world. For more information, visit our website, jamesmerrillhouse.org. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Angela Flournoy. I'm very excited to be here today. I met the current James Merrill Fellow, Tochukwu Okafor, as part of a mentorship program hosted by Cambilio, which is a residency and support system for Black fiction writers. I was able to read a lot of different applications for mentor partners. And one thing that struck me about this particular writer is that he had what I like to call, when I teach, real skin in the game. In all of his stories, there were real people who had real emotional stakes in the narrative, and he found a way to grip you into their lives and the choices that they had to make immediately. I'm so excited to be able to talk to him more today about his writing, and I'm so excited for all of you all to get to listen to some of his words. Tochukwu Okafor is an MFA fiction candidate at Emerson College and holds a master's degree from Carnegie Mellon University. He has received support from the Elizabeth George Foundation, the John Anson Kittredge Fund, Aspen Words, Vermont Studio Center, Sewanee Writers Conference, Breadloaf Writers Conference, the Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Arts, and elsewhere. He is at work on a story collection and a novel. Welcome.
Hi, Angela. Thank you. Thank you for that lovely introduction. It's just so wonderful to hear you talk about my work in that regard.
We're here to do it for an hour. I'm very excited. One of the things, as I mentioned, was just thinking about the way that you create your fiction is the feeling that there are real stakes. And I thought you could start us out by reading a story that is really emblematic of that. One of the stories in your collection that the stakes are like on 100,000. So I think it's actually a perfect place for us to start, and then we can rejoin our conversation afterwards.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, I would read from the story Ogwego, and yes, it's I don't know, but this is just high expectations, but it's a story. It's a fictional story. Ogwego. I swear I have never committed a crime before. I have never squashed a mosquito, crushed an ant, or raised a broom against a cockroach. I'm telling the truth. But on the night after Easter, at exactly 10:30 p.m., on 9 April 2012, I transgressed. Just once, and that was it. I was in bed, playing a game on my Nokia, passing time, you know. Well, I wasn't only lazing around. I was waiting for my mother to fall asleep. Sometimes I would rise from the bed, go to my door, and fling it open. I would move into the living room, turn on the TV, and elevate the volume loud enough to concern our neighbors. Other times, I went into the kitchen, opening and closing pots and clanging utensils. Despite my banging against the wall, the TV racket, and the kitchen clangor, no sound emerged from my mother's bedroom. I walked out the back door into the yard. It was a moonless night. Owls wept on the leafless branches. Crickets gossiped in corners. We hadn't seen rain in 2 months. so the ground was dry and easy to manipulate. With a shovel, I dug a hole in the dimensions of my body, pausing to wipe the sweat off my face with my shirt. Afterward, I retrieved an empty pail near our uncompleted bungalow. I uncovered the gallon of chlorine under the stoop I had bought the previous day and grasped the machete leaning against the fence. Satisfied, I entered the house. Yet, nothing came from my mother's room, no snore, cough, or sneeze. In my room, I grabbed a pillow. Before I exited, I stopped in front of the mirror. I did not resemble a criminal. I was Tochukwu Okoye, aka Ekene, a 35-year-old unemployed Nigerian, a holder of 2 university degrees, a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from the University of Benin, and a master's degree in the same field from the University of Glasgow. I was Ekene Chukwu Okoye, aka Ekene, the only son of the late Chief Daniel Okoye and Mrs. Patricia Okoye. If you must know, I was Ekene Chukwu Okoye, aka Ekene, a handsome bachelor with light skin, an afro, and thick lashes above my almond-shaped eyes, long-legged, broad-shouldered, and ripped-chested. I was your dream man. I glided down the corridor outside my bedroom, lined with drums, buckets, and 2 crates of soft drinks, and creaked open my mother's bedroom door. She lay on her side, sound and fast in slumber. Her head rested on her palm. Her other arm was outstretched on her side. Since her husband, my father, died, she slept on one half of the bed, close to the edge, the other half crease-free. I crept toward her, hoisted the pillow above me, and brought it home on her head. I held still. She gasped, trashing. The pillow muffled her. She fought back. My grip was firm. We went at it for some minutes, her attempting to push away my arms, me driving the foam hard into her face. Her energy began to ebb, and her body yielded. I went, humph, humph, pinning her, my face hardening in the dark. My mother seized. Her chest collapsed. Her arms drooped by her sides. I stopped pushing, pressing, humphing. I loosened my clutch. When I withdrew and set the pillow on my late father's side, my mother's eyes were open. Her pupils rolled up as though staring, here but gone. I crouched on the floor and wept. I brightened my phone screen, 11:37 p.m. I circled the bed and, with deep breath, lifted my mother's body. It fell against me, straight black air in my face, and I staggered backward. I planted a foot behind the other to steady myself. Her smell overwhelmed my nostrils, a blend of shea butter, coconut oil, and dusting powder. I seized her waist with one hand, and with the other, smoothed her hair in place. Wobbly and puffy, I dragged her body past the corridor, past my room, toward the back door, and out into the yard. I counted my steps down the stoop. Upon getting to the hole, I dropped her body on the ground and rolled her in. I was not done yet. With the machete in hand, I anchored down into the grave. I placed the blade against my mother's neck and started to sever. I angled her head so the drama could be contained. Yet, the blood oozed all over, on my face, shirt, denim, and the grave walls. Her head was off. I climbed out, filled the pail a quarter way with chlorine, reached for the head, and lowered it into the solvent. I did not want blood on the ground. The crime must be perfect. I buried my mother. I bought the pail by its metal handle and re-entered the house. In the bathroom, I washed and wrapped my mother's head in layers of nylon. I cut open a black polythene and concealed the whole thing in it. I removed my stained wear, slid into the tub, opened the faucet, and shut my eyes. The water was icy darts on my skin, and I shivered. The gurgling in the background, I drifted half asleep. My phone tolled. I shut off the tap, released the plug hole, slunk out of the tub, and toweled my loins. The ringing stopped and then resumed. I collected my phone from my trouser pocket. I answered. Guy man, how far you now? Ibube's bass peeled. I been call you, but you no pick. I apologized. I said, I'm finishing up here. Guy man, I be think say you don't develop cold feet oh. He laughed. Anyway, I dey wait you 30 minutes. He hung up. I met Ebube at the University of Benin. We took the same classes. We attended the same Catholic church. We are members of the Society of St. Vincent de Paul, assigned to the same clients. Ebube was a year older than me. We never fought. In our second year, we rented an apartment off the university campus. Sometimes Ebube could not afford half of the rent. I covered for him. We bonded over food, drinks, coursework, cars, and women. We were a thing. When we graduated, I got a job at Monumental Bank as a teller. No one would hire Ebube. He knew nobody. My teller role happened thanks to my father, who, alive at the time, had a friend who had connections with the bank's managing director. I never wrote an application letter, submitted a resume, or interviewed. Only a phone call informed me of my start date. Ebube learned needlework and helped his mother in a tailoring business. He clung to the hope of a white-collar job. The system failed him. We were first-class graduates. We were energetic young men. We were the future. Our country could not dim our light. We corresponded through text, calls, and emails. We exchanged scholarship opportunities, applied and received rejections. As if a stroke of luck, or the universe and God plotting to bring us together again, we were awarded the same scholarship in the same year to the UK universities. Ibube went on to Manchester and I to Glasgow. We commuted by train to visit each other. Ibube wanted to remain in the UK. He arranged a marriage with a white woman. 2 weeks before the wedding, the woman chickened out. I believed my foreign degree would earn me a better opportunity when I returned to Nigeria. I was wrong. Our visas expired. We moved back into our parents' homes. We roamed the streets. The nation was declining. 2 months later, months of non-communication with each other and waiting for a miracle, Ebube phoned me, invited me to dinner at a fine dining Chinese restaurant in Victoria Island. At first, I was happy to hear from him. Then worries nagged me. No chance in this life could Ebube afford an expensive meal. It had to be one of his jokes. Yet, the invitation was real. I loitered outside the restaurant. Ebube arrived in a brand new Hyundai Jeep. Perhaps the heat was inducing my hallucination. Ebube in a vehicle, get out of here. He embraced me, and I had no other explanations for the reality before me. He dizzied me with his scent of rare cologne. We chatted before and after dinner. Ebube now owned a vehicle importation line and ran an estate. I told him my father had passed from a heart attack 2 days after my return from the UK. When I asked about his success secret, he chortled. I insisted. He leaned close and whispered, Ogwego, money ritual. He nodded and cackled again. I would learn that Ibube killed his girlfriend and used her best parts for the ritual. The news said she had been abducted on her way home from work. Her girlfriend was his dearest support, and he had sacrificed her for money. I left him, my disbelief unbearable. I boarded a Danfo after declining his offer to drive me. Week after week, he texted, emailed, and called. He asked me to consider exploring his path. Week after week, I regarded my mother, imagined killing her, and shuddered. The premise, though, had begun to morph in my head, and would not leave by mere shrugging or shaking my head. When an inspiration held sway over your heart, someday you were bound to embrace it. 11:48 p.m. I changed into new clothes, grabbed my wallet, and slipped into sandals. I secured my mother's head with a black tote. I scurried around the house, shutting windows and snuffing lights. I locked the back door and exited out front. A hen and her chicks strutted by in search of worms. I descended the short flight of steps, past the birds and out the gate. At the end of the street, I hailed an Okada and haggled the price of a trip to the bus stop. We conceded to 200 naira, an obscene cost, though. I didn't care. I would be rich. I would own cars and mansions, and men like this Okada man would crawl to me, pleading to be saved from poverty. At the intersection of Johnson and Church Street, where a plastic factory sprawled on one roadside and churches lined the other side, was a police checkpoint. Their torchlights flitted as they pranced about inspecting motorists. Despite the wind in my face, billowing my shirt, sweat formed on my temple and palms. I hugged my crime to my chest, my heart restless. I wanted to instruct the Okada man to take me home, but we were a few feet from the checkpoint. Pivoting around would be suspicious. One policeman raised his baton, signaling the Okada man to stop, and the Okada man screeched as he braked. I greeted the officer. The man shined his torch in the Okada man's face. I shielded my eyes with one hand and clutched the bag with the other. Where una two dey go at this time? The policeman asked. I began to speak. I stopped, cleared my throat. I'm on my way to visit my mother at the hospital, I said. She was admitted earlier today. Sorry, the policeman stalled. He studied the Okada man, who maintained a stiff lip. You know say we know they allow Okada by this time, Aboki? The Okada man flinched at being called an Aboki. Friend, but a local slur. The policeman aimed his flash at the bag, glanced at me and said nothing. I reached into my pocket, withdrew my wallet and fetched a 500 naira note. I squeezed the money into the policeman's fist and said, Officer, please manage this for tonight. The policeman cracked a smile. He adjusted his beret, tugged at his belt, and lowered his light. His fingers, calloused like an old tree bark, brushed my arm. He whistled to his colleague to come over. You know saying that two of us they work this night, he said. I nodded, fetched another 500 naira note, crumpled the money into an oddity, and handed it to the second policeman. The second policeman patted the first policeman on the shoulder and sprang back to his side of the road. I faked a smile. I hope say your mama go get well, the first policeman said. He slapped the Okada man on the head and told him he was free to go. After we rode past, The Okadaman hissed and cursed the policemen, the country, and himself for doing this job. I stayed mum. I loosened my grip on the bag. At junction, I got off, paid the Okadaman, and boarded a danfo to Oshodi. The danfo barreled past streets and bridges, honked at slow drivers, and cruised along potholes. The air inside stank of rotten tomatoes. I slid open the window and jutted out my face for a clean breeze. We stopped at intersections to pick up passengers. We crawled past checkpoints and roadside garbage. At Oshodi, the conductor screamed at us to disembark. My belly churned and groaned, and I recalled food. The last thing I ate was yam and palm oil. Hawkers and yellow buses lined Oshodi. Agberos huddled in a corner, smoking weed, waving danfo drivers along. The atmosphere thrived with decaying stuff and roaring gospel audios. I glanced left, right, and left again before crossing. I skipped past hawkers crooning their wares, suspicious fellows in shadows, and shabbily dressed men and women chattering in twos and threes, returning from their workplaces. This was Lagos, a sleepless city where despair locked behind smiles and ambition dwelled in churches and mosques rather than the government, and money was the people's anthem. This was Lagos, an opportunity hub for the well-connected. I turned around the corner where ships nudged in residential buildings, and then Ibube's jeep came into view. I knocked on the driver's side window. Ibube wound down the glass and regarded me. He laughed. "Guy man, you resemble who them beat," he said. I was not beaten. I needed sleep. His stereo blasted Two-Face Idibia's "You Are My African Queen." He asked if I had the package, and I held the bag in his face. I climbed into the front passenger seat. The air conditioner swooshed. The smell of lavender and cigarettes could not be missed. Ibube had black and gold locks, a half shock bobbing on his shoulder, the other half pinned in a bun. I considered how I would configure my hair when I became rich. Perhaps I would braid cornrows. Perhaps I would dye the tips gold. Or perhaps I would share off the whole thing. Ibube pulled into the street. I deposited the bag on the floor and dozed off to the stereo music. Ibube sing along and the unevenness of the road. I think I'm going to stop there. Thank you. Angela, I think you might be muted.
That had to happen at least once, right? Thank you. That was really beautiful, and just I think it was a perfect thing to read because there's just such vivid imagery. There's so much to just see. And there's so many just really great sensory details. One of the things that struck me about the story the first time I read it is a story that begins as a confessional, and especially one that is like got a defensive stance at the same time that it is confessing. As this story begins, is always one where a reader is immediately sort of put in the position to have to discern what to believe and who to trust. And I'm curious for you, as a person who's in your collection that we've been working on together. Well, you've been working on it, and I've just been talking to you about it. Our Lady Queen of Africa. One of the things that is the case in every story collection, but the way that your stories really feel like they're fully realized worlds each is that there's just so many voices and so many perspectives and so many like agendas that all of these different characters have. I really am curious how do you like initially conceive of these voices, these characters?
Thank you. Thank you, Angela, for your kind comments. And I must say it's a we. We've been working on this together. And I know, yes, I'm the one who sat in a room and drafted all the stories. I'm the one who has rewritten them. I'm the one who typed them into a computer. And the work is me changing the sentences and changing the paragraphs, but I still feel this is not just me doing all the work. And so thank you so much. Um, this story, I I think it came from two places. And perhaps I'll speak to this story and speak to how my other stories come about. Um, so this story came from me wanting to really challenge the idea of money rituals. So just a little bit of background. I grew up in Lagos, Nigeria, and we would always have. I mean, I grew up in a family. I grew up sheltered, and my dad, or my parents actually would set up these curfews that we weren't allowed to go out at 7 p.m. Or whenever the sun just went down, you weren't just allowed to go out, and it was their fear of for their safety. Um, and at an early age, I started hearing stories about people who went missing, and they showed up with incomplete body parts, or people who you know they just went missing forever, and it was just concluded they had been used for money ritual. And I eventually learned. I mean, it's all of these things is happening at a very young age, and you would think, kids should be protected from news like that. But I was aware of news like that for my safety. And we learned that it was money rituals, and I learned that money rituals was a diabolical thing where people used other people for money. They sacrifice them. They take them to, a a witch doctor, and either they cut off the person's, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be too graphic, but they just use the person, murder the person for money ritual. And there is the curious case where someone also uses their own body parts for ritual. And so this story came from my very how this, growing up in the country, and this sort of news was always just like a staple. It was always recurring in the news, and I was just so morbidly curious about it and wanting to interrogate it because it made no sense. It's firstly, it's gross humanity in grossing humanity against another human being. Um, and secondly, the logic did not just add up to me that you would sacrifice someone and suddenly money would come out. And so for this story, it was just, the way stories come about, it's just this experience or this thing that's in the real world and a character. And so this story began with this character. His voice was very distinct to me. I think it just struck me. I can't remember where or how. I think I drafted it during the early months of the pandemic, and I think it was during those moments of just being with myself and being able to hear the voices in my head clearly. And this character came to me very clearly, and he started out by being I don't want to describe him, but he started out by telling me how he had never committed an offense and how this is one major offense he would get to commit, and he hopes he would be, throughout the story he tries to justify it, but he hopes it wouldn't be seen as a real offense because it's just one. He's putting a number to it. It's just one. Um, and I think this is how my other stories in the collection have come about by mm, mostly from the news, mostly from things I observed growing up, um, mostly from my experiences, and but just waiting for the right, I mean, I won't say waiting, but just character, hearing a character voice and just allowing the character lead me while I know sort of understanding of their world, because it's something that's happened in the real world. I don't know. That's a very long-winded response, but I hope that makes sense.
No, that's great. I think that's similar to the way that I think about characters as being a like the sum of like a series of choices, right? Like we make an initial choice for a character, which is to, just even have them say something like, I've never committed a crime. And then they, through just the nature of imagining a life, like they make another choice and they make another choice. And as they make these choices, the readers are starting to get a sense of like what kind of person this is. And it does not mean that like people are only like the sum of their actions, but sometimes those choices are just like a choice to notice a thing over another thing, right? Um, and yeah, it's sort of hard to figure out. Um, it's hard to figure out when sometimes you've decided a character has made a choice and it's just not working. That's a thing that I think that we've like discussed as we've discussed some of these stories and revising is like sometimes it comes down to like a very small choice that a character made. It just for some reason in the story logic, which is its own kind of self-generating thing, that choice put the story like over here. So it's really interesting to think about the ways that like the way that you grew up like can be like the entry point into the story, and then from there this person is sort of created. And in this story, we got a little bit of them. We have these also like these other two characters, his friends, who remain like sort of mischievous, but also kind of seductive in their wealth, in this way that makes the world feel like not like it's just in this bubble of this person's head, but like larger than that. Um, what related to those choices, one of the things that has struck me about this collection, Our Lady Queen of Africa, is that there is, I think, more than, especially in like I would say like American fiction, a more explicit sort of understanding of their relationship to just like economics. I feel like there's this kind of coyness that a lot of American fiction has about characters are doing things and there are like economic ramifications for them, but they're not necessarily being honest about the fact that they're making these choices based on economics. And I was wondering if that was a thing that you thought about sort of actively, like kind of foregrounding that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Angela. You make these very kind, very like apt observations, and it's true. It's really the choices. And yes, it's I to answer your question, I did think about the economics of it. I don't think, and this is just my opinion, and I'm sure someone else will disagree. I do not think, given my background. I mean, I live in the US now, but given, and I think this might be true for anywhere or anybody, to write about a person without engaging with the complete, in, situational um, awareness or cognition of that person. In this case, it's the economics of it. I think I, I Yes, I thought about that a lot, because it was my way of making commentary about quick money. Um, most it's and it's not about this character mostly. It's my way of just critiquing the idea of quick money. Even great, when I was in college, because I studied electrical engineering, some of my classmates would say how, you know, when they graduate, it's quick money. Like they would get into an oil corporation where the money is, and it was just there is always this backdrop of everything you do is just the money. It's the money. It's and Nigeria is a country I love deeply, but it's also a country I tend to critique very harshly. Um, and so
As we
I
do with things we love sometimes.
true. And for this story, it's just my way of not just critiquing. Of course, the bigger picture is the failed government, but also we we make up the government, and this is an argument I put forward all the time. We can't always just say the government has failed us. We make up this government that is failing us. We are part of the government. We are the government. And so this character, to connect the dots, it's the choices they made. They became their own government. They could have chosen not to go into this thing that they know is just a crime, which they put a word to. Um, but they chose to because, again, it's the motivation for being rich and telling that to us all the time. You could see it by how they want their hair to look like. They could then get expensive hair done, what kind of cars they would drive, what kind of women they would have, which is also its own problem. But I to answer your question, come full circle on it. Economics is something I think deeply, and I think it also raises tension the, for crafts for crafts purposes in fiction. Having the character have that push and pull with their environment, whether it's the weather, it could be the politics of the time, it could be social constructs around them, or social situation in their neighborhood. But in this case, it's the character versus themselves and versus life around them.
One of a thing that Ikene observes is that the Okada driver uses friend, but like it can also be a slur, which felt like this sort of interesting. The idea that a word that is supposed to like bring you close is also like, and it's supposed to sort of like be this intimacy is also something that is like trying to like denigrate you or be a pejorative. It made me think about just generally writing about where we're from. And you kind of touched on this a little bit, like when you write about a place, especially a place that is not perfect and is perhaps not like the average reader is going to not is going to have to take your word for it, or at least like in this, outside of Lagos, they're going to have to take your word for this being just like one slice of this world. What do you feel your sort of responsibility is as far as representation? Do you feel any sort of responsibility in that regard? Because it's like you love a place, but you also a place. I know this place, and I just wonder if that is something that you think about, like how to strike that balance.
That is a very interesting question, and I would say yes and no. And I it's yes and no. I do feel the responsibility to represent a place well enough and true enough, but I also feel I want to represent the character. I want to be true to them, and I want to be true to their realities. I think a story, it's just what it is. It's just one story. There are many stories out there, which is why I still get shocked today when people would read something and then it becomes their only version of a people.
Right, which you absolutely can't be responsible for people not wanting to read another thing.
Exactly, and I, I and maybe I'd seen this before I moved to the US, but I think I became conscious of it when I came here, especially as someone who, you know, African immigrants, living in the US and also has to be black. Is black, I'm proudly black, happily black. And all of these identities. And then you would probably sit in a workshop and, just hear someone make a comment about how, for example, I'll give you one solid example. I remember being in a workshop where we were reading one of Jhumpa Lahiri's stories, and someone made a sweeping comment about how the immigrants and survival. I mean, and I just these people are also capable of love. They are capable of creativity. It's just one slice that Lahiri is probably representing in that story that for us to engage with and for us to see and understand and perhaps raise more questions, because I want to think that's her stories just raise these very curious questions. And so yes, I feel I need to do the work. I need to do the research. I need to strike. I think Anadichi has said this in a very brilliant TED talk. The danger of a single story. I think I need to strike for a true balance of stories. But at the same time, I don't want to sit at the desk while drafting and think, no, if I write about roadside garbage, people will think Lagos is a place full of roadside garbage. And I
I
think
mean, what place isn't? I mean, I live in New York. There's a lot of road. I mean, that's how else does the trash get picked up in New York City? Roadside garbage.
Yeah, but it's true. But you'll be surprised, Angela, that people still do this. Like, I go to a lot of author events, especially authors who I know or who I like to read, and I've attended some of their readings in Boston, and it's so interesting when people project onto the story and to say it's their thing, it's their problem, rather than recognizing the common humanity in these stories of how, like this character, for example, how at the the sheer level of it, they're in difficult strides. They feel they are poor, they feel their disappointment, and just recognizing all of these basic um you know denominators we share as human beings, and all these emotional capabilities we all have. And so, no, yes and no. I'm going to play it safe that yes, I want to write about my place and um, write about places I recognize and write about experiences I recognize, and do it well enough. That's true. And also be careful not to be in the process of revision. And I think this is where intentionality comes out. But no, I don't want to sit at the desk and then censor myself and tell myself no, that the policeman takes bribery. I mean, and maybe this is a good point to say, look at the US. Look at because it's like you would read a story like this and, oh my god, Nigerians and fraud, the scammers. And I'm thinking, oh my god, look at the Craigslist here. That's enough to tell
Well, that sort of leads me to my next question, which is just when you came here, it was to study engineering, correct?
Yes.
So I'm just curious to how you found your way to writing, or were you always writing alongside this other pursuit?
I've always written. I have always been writing, and as long as I breathe and enjoy the fine weather and difficult winters, I think I will continue to write. I did not know what I was doing was writing. I did not come to writing through stories. I came to it through letters. Um, I wrote letters to a late family friend, um, dearest late Mr. Anyebosi, and I would write letters to him each day, telling him about how my day went. I think I was in elementary school, and I think I continued the tradition until their family moved away, and then my family moved away. Um, and so I would also write about injustices, simple little injustices or moments of discomfort that I felt at home. Like, when my siblings were portioning me a small size of chicken, and I'm like, I want a bigger size, and I would write about that. And I also embellished. I won't call them lies. I embellished in those letters. And yeah, that was my entry. I didn't realize I was, when I think of it now, I think I was probably wanting to tell stories. I was wanting to tell about these things nobody around me was seeing, and I wanted to share it with, someone. I mean, given my Catholic background, there is this very poetic verse in the Bible that says, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. I'm not religious anymore, but I just love that line. And so I wanted to share these stories. And Mr. Nyebusi, late Mr. Nyebusi, was so willing to hear them and read them and invite me to his house to talk about them. and and um and then I moved on and I read a lot of I would read and read. And it's so funny, I didn't realize that people wrote for a living, that it was a career. My family did see me, my parents, my siblings, they thought I would. There is this very, I don't know, it seems to be a weird thing to say to someone, but also it's coming from a place of humor. So they'll say, you read so much, you probably go blind from reading. and, so, and so I was that kid who would just read and read, and they let me, and I read books I was supposed to read, books I was not supposed to read.
What were some
Um,
of those early books that inspired you?
I, 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 I read a lot of British and American children's books. um, but they didn't. I wouldn't say they inspired me. I just found them really curious. I've never seen snow growing up. But I think when I began to gain more access to books, I think books like Chinua Achebe. I read Chinua Achebe a lot, and I think I read Buchi Emecheta. I read Flora Nwapa. I read poetry from other African countries. I remember reading trying to remember. I'm blanking out on his name right now. When you need names, they just simply disappear. I read Bessie Head. Um, I read Ama Aita Aido, the Ghanaian, right? I think she's late now. Um, so and then when I began to read these books, there was something so very familiar and tender about them. And there was something also true about them that I loved. And then I think I then read Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and I thought, oh, wait, you could write about these people, and, and so she was, and I felt she was writing about stories and you know experiences that she knows that nobody's talking about, and so I thought, so I could do that too. She did it and got away with it, and has published books, and I think maybe I could do that and get away with it and publish books too. And so that's how I would say I got into my own writing. Reading other people and just realizing, oh, So I could tell this story about this thing I know about that nobody hasn't written about, so probably, and yeah, share it with the world.
It's really interesting that you started kind of like, in a more epistolary form, like writing these letters, because one of the things that also strikes me about your writing is the the sort of sense of ease in the first person. As a person who I rarely write in the first person because I don't feel like I can't figure out how to use it to justify everything I want to talk about. It starts to feel like the artifice starts to show too much. I mean, all writing is obviously like, well, all fiction writing is artifice. Well, all writing really is. Once you have to start organizing your thoughts, right, and trying to figure out how to present them for another person. But I find one thing about your first person is that it seems very sort of, it's very different and depending on the story, but there's like a kind of confidence that within it, everything you need to know will be sort of addressed in time. And also a kind of command of time that is those early letters where you were embellishing and listing your gripes with your siblings. It sounds like they really were useful, and I can kind of see the fruit of that. And so you're also working on a novel, which you and I haven't actually talked much about, but I was hoping to hear more about now.
Oh, I am in trouble. This novel needs to be. Yeah, it's. Thank you, Angela. I'm always appreciative of you, and I can't wait to read more of your work. And hopefully, I'll someday when I read your first person story, I would probably text you or email you and say, Angela, you finally did it.
I have one actually out there with one third person, but it is sneakily full of third person. Um, but if you would like to, you don't have to talk about your novel.
Yeah.
I
No,
think
I wish.
it's there in your bio. So
True. I mean, I read a lot of author interviews, and I go to just sit and watch them talk lives on live talk like real time on panels. And sometimes when they ask them, "Oh, what are you working on next?" and some would say, "So I'm going to play mysterious now and not tell you." Some would say, "I'm superstitious that if I share, it might not come into fruition." I'm neither. I am not so special about my work, my writing. It's the work is special when it's out in the world, and it means something to just I just think of it as if my work means something to one person. I think I'm grateful. And so yeah, I could tell you about this novel. um, it's it's a novel set from colonial Nigeria. It spans a really long time. I don't know what the heck I'm doing, but we'll see how it comes out. It's fully drafted, so I'm just in revision and tightening things, and also, like you mentioned, trying to have a good control of time, because this novel really does span a long time. So it spans from colonial Nigeria, to the Civil War, the Nigeria Biafra Civil War, 1967 to 1970, and then lingers on into the political trouble of 1993, with the tussle between the military and the civilian, exchange of power. Um, and then it moves on to Trump's America. Um, and so the novel just follows this boy who is a spirit in his previous life, and is born in the country. And so his period as a spirit is just during the colonial and civil war period. But he's born when things have, political climate has become fairly stable. Um, And like you and I, he has a normal life. It's drama-free. And then there are situations in the novel that happen mostly from sexual abuse and religious trauma. And that changes its trajectory, and also the way the story is being told. Um, and then this goes on, and it navigates the anti-gay law, the period of the anti-gay law in Nigeria, and comes ultimately ends in Trump's America, and sort of navigates what each of these periods in time mean, what each of the experiences the character has mean, what what their situation with their environment mean. And at the end of the day, it's just, I think this novel, I say it now, it's just an act of hope. There are serious things. I mean, most people read it and consider, my God, this is so sad. This is for most people, I feel that would be the reaction. I too was sad. And I think maybe that would translate to a reader. I too was deeply sad and affected writing it. And it's not something I'm going to shy away from saying. I was driven to very dark places, and I'm grateful for my support system that were there for me. But it did drive me to really dark places and really dark moods, and but yeah, but ultimately I just think writing this novel, the novel itself, though unpublished, it's an act of hope. Um, an act of hope for me, an act of hope for the reader. Yeah, an act of hope for anyone who encounters it.
Well, I'm very excited to read it one day. Um, I think that is like a really lovely place to end, thinking about like what we can do, what we do that is sort of an act of hope. Um, I'm sorry to say this, but I hope enjoy the rest of your time at James Merrill House. And I'm excited for our conversations to continue on our own. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Angela. You're so very kind.
So, hi.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much, Bergen. It is lovely to see the James Merrill hidden study of 107 behind you. It's very nostalgic.
Yes. Yeah.
Thanks so much. So this is my new book. It's called The Math Campers.
My own novel. It's called These Women.
It looks like this.
Well, the first thing I'll say is all the dreams are actual dreams. There's nothing worse than a fabricated dream. You can always tell.
I normally don't write in first person because of the fact that as soon as you have a narrator, you tend to have somebody listening, or there's an implied audience.
I just got to soak up in the atmosphere in that house. You just feel like a writer, and you feel like you're part of this tradition in a community, and it feels like the work is important.
Magical things happen when you're looking at Merrill's books.
Well, it was a really, really transformative residence for me. It might sound like a bit of an overstatement, but it really wasn't.
The Merrill's really distinct imagination was present in every detail.
Thanks, Brandon. Bye. Enjoy Stonington on my behalf.